Mr. Will Mackerel.
Hi, Dan. Sorry, Dan.
The session that we will have here with will be quite interactive. Okay, so he will go through also some Q&A while he's presenting. So I would encourage you to really ask him questions. So he's, you know, Nestle. It's a very large global corporation. And it's really a pleasure and an honor for us to have you here, Will. So thank you very much for your time and joining us here. So I want and yeah, maybe this is just to look right now. Okay, I don't know. We'll do something with that later on, maybe. All right. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. A very good hello, Xin Chao, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've been to RMIT a few times now. I've also been helping on the management of, Master of Global Trade as well. So I'm familiar with RMIT. Great place, great students, great lecturing staff as well. So now I understand, unfortunately, my QR code isn't yet working. So I've got my HR team working in the background. It's working? Okay. It's been fixed, supposedly. If it hasn't, let us know. It'll reappear at the end of the course. This is just to help our HR team track who's attending the lectures that we're giving at these sort of events, because this is something we're trying to do on a global basis. So they're required to report back to our global headquarters what we're doing, who we're doing it with, hence the request to you to share your information with us. Okay, so there'll be another opportunity to catch that QR code later in the presentation. So what I'm going to cover is a very quick introduction to Nestle Vietnam. If you have questions about the global business, I'm happy to try and fit that in as well. Then we'll have a quick look at our supply chain activity, but very, very quick before I get straight into Daniel's questions that he's pre-prepared for us to act as the sort of basis for this afternoon's talk, and hopefully for you to build on that discussion, okay? Now, the samples are there just for a bit of fun. I'm told you're not allowed to eat and drink in this lecture theatre, so we thought it was probably best if at the end of the talk you come up and help yourself either to some of the coffees. There are some nuts and things and Kit Kats, so help yourself to whatever you wish to keep you going for the rest of the afternoon. Okay, is that all clear? So again, a quick introduction. Will Macrath, Head of Supply Chain here in Nestle Vietnam, 6 years in Vietnam, 12 years before that in Switzerland, and before that back in the UK, which is where I'm originally from. We do have as well a video. Daniel will distribute a link to that so you can watch that at your leisure, but rather than take up time with our talk, I'll go straight into our business. This gives you an idea of where we are. We were originally here in Vietnam in 1912. That's right, 1912, so 109 years ago. Had to leave during the war in 1975, came back in the 90s during the Doi Moi period. The first business that was set up was La Vie, which is a joint venture business, the waters business. That was followed shortly afterwards with our food and beverage business. And by 1995, we had a fully fledged Nestle Vietnam Limited business activity here in Vietnam. Since then, we've grown to just over 3,000 employees, 600 of which are in the La Vie waters business. These are the main brands, some of which I hope you're familiar with. Milo, I suspect. Heard of Maggie, hopefully? One reaction. So one person's heard of Maggie. This is something I need to try and build upon. Okay. We win some awards for being a good place to work. We'll talk more about careers later in the presentation. This is representing our capital investment in the structures and factories in Vietnam. In addition, we're buying a lot of materials from Vietnam on an ongoing basis, particularly coffee. We spend about $700 million each and every year on Vietnamese coffee, for example. We're still a traditional trade business, which means we work through distributors for the majority. So about 136 for our food and beverage business, and more than that, nearly 200 for the La Vie business. 4 food and beverage factories, 2 La Vie factories, and they're serviced by their own distribution centers, so 2 and 2 in the north of each. Okay. How does supply chain work? Again, this isn't to illustrate the people doing it, but more to show you the functions they're responsible for. So starting at 1 o'clock in the morning, we have procurement, headed by a gentleman named Vikram. We have a support team from HR, from finance and control. Then we move around to our intermarket supply. This is the supply of Nestle goods to and from our Nestle affiliate businesses worldwide. That's about 20% of our business here in Vietnam. A lot of exports, and I'll talk more about that as we come to it. Mr. Vu is responsible for export development. Mr. Vu, would you like to stand up and introduce yourself and explain very quickly what you do?
My name is Vu. I joined Nestle 6 years ago. It's Will who hired me into Nestle. So very happy to be here. My mission is to explain Nestle Vietnam exports, and we'll explain you later on with a slide on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very quick. Okay, next is supply chain development. They're working on the sort of support processes and nowadays getting very much into digitization, business analytics, and decision support tools. Next, we have the logistics activity. This covers the local distribution of goods around Vietnam, but also gets involved in the import and export of both materials and finished goods for export around the world. Our planning function is working out how all this fits together, the timings and forecasts, and reacting to some of the disruptions we've seen post-COVID. You'll have heard, I'm sure, about the boat that blocked the Suez Canal. That added 2 weeks lead time to many of our incoming materials, and it's adding 2 or 3 weeks to some of our finished product going to Europe, for example. And finally, we have a customer service activity, which we're developing and maturing as our customers mature into something we call customer-facing supply chain. Okay, any questions on our supply chain context? Not a supply chain lecture, so I didn't want to spend any more time than that, but I could bore you for hours on supply chain if you wish. Okay. So now I'm going into Daniel's questions. So these are the pre-prepared questions he had for me. And the first one was, do we think Nestle is perceived in Vietnam, and what are the challenges to our image? Globally, Nestle has kind of mixed reviews in some countries. There are issues going back 30 or 40 years around baby milk. There are issues with supply chains like cocoa. These are things we are trying to address and trying to improve, and our reputation and our brand image is very important to us. Here in Vietnam, I suspect many of those issues are less obvious. We like to think of ourselves as a local business, and about 99.5% of our employees are Vietnamese. I'm very much the exception as an expatriate. But I bring in knowledge and network of the other Nestle businesses, which is very important for the supply chain activity. Okay. The brands I hope you'll be familiar with, like Milo, like Maggi, like La Vie. Many people have grown up with these brands and feel some context and affinity to them. And we hope that presents a good image to our consumer and to our customers alike and to stakeholders throughout Vietnam. Does anyone have any observations or comments on Nestle's image in Vietnam? Yes, super, number one.
I have a friend working for a packaging company, a German packaging company, and she has the good comment on Nestle that you have very integrated production process, everything with very strict quality controls. Yeah, that is the first comment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, quality, very important. Consumers, customers alike, you need to be a high quality if you're in the fast-moving consumer goods business. You also need to add value. And I think we'll talk some of the added value areas like sustainability as I go through the slides. Thank you. SIG, yes, we use SIG machinery and SIG packaging for some of our products. Excellent, thank you. Want to get another microphone, Daniel? And if we get other questions, Vu, maybe you could ask people.
It's maybe not directly related, but partly. The quality standards that you were talking about. So I guess as a global company, you have quality standards that you maintain worldwide. But are there some standards that you only have, like for Vietnam and then for Europe, different on similar goods?
Yes. Yes, there are often differences between geographical regulatory frameworks and the requirements that they might have. So take, for example, in coffee, here you can have a certain residue of pesticides and herbicides. In Europe, the figure is 10 times lower. So a herbicide like glyphosate, you can have 10 times more here than you can in Europe. Now, from a food safety point of view, both are deemed to be well below the safe limit, or so they're both very safe, but one is much, much lower than the other. And there are many examples of that where regulatory frameworks are not fully aligned, and we have to observe and manufacture to both. So in practice, of course, we always try and get to the highest possible standard and the lowest level of residues possible. Okay. So why set up manufacturing plants here in Vietnam? There are several answers to that. And first of all, for a domestic business, many of the things we're producing are suited to a domestic taste, to a Vietnamese taste profile. So some of the coffee products here, for example, Nescafé Café Soda, that is a very much a Vietnamese coffee product designed to suit Vietnamese tastes and preferences. Same with the Café Viet Black, same logic. We also have to think about distributing many of these products. You can see a large number of the products we have here contain a lot of water. They're quite expensive on a cost per unit to move around the countryside. If you had to ship these in from other parts of the world and then sell them and distribute them here, the cost of logistics would make them unprofitable. Okay, so you'll see what we have locally are either products that have been suited to the local Vietnamese taste, or in many cases, driven by cost. It's simply more cost effective to onshore your production and have local production. Okay, now the final example would be our coffee production, which is really for export. And here we're close to the coffee producing region. We have a huge interest in coffee globally, and we're working very close with Vietnamese farmers to achieve the quality, and cost standards, etc., that we need in order to produce the best coffee for distribution around the world. Now, in that case, we produce a semi-finished product of processed coffee, which we then export around the world. It's then final processing and packing is done at destination for distribution. And for a product like coffee, which is a powder and relatively lightweight, that makes sense for the logistics to move it around the world in that way. You're always going to have to move coffee around the world. And if you think about it, when you process coffee, you actually reduce the weight that you're moving around the world. So if you moved raw beans, you'd have to move 2 tons of raw beans to every 1 ton of pure soluble coffee that we actually move. So it's actually logistically more efficient for us to do it that way. Okay, and the thinking behind that goes into each and every one of the products, and then the capital investment and the manufacturing footprint that we put into place. Okay, so there are still products that we are importing. Examples would be the infant formula milk powder, ice cream. We simply don't have the critical mass to justify the investment in a ice cream manufacturing capacity here. Similarly, these sort of products like Kit Kat, they're not yet big enough for us to justify the expense and investment in a manufacturing facility. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. I wanted then to exemplify what this means in practice by just showing you what we're doing. This is simply finished products, and we are importing from producing markets all the way around the world, from Australia to Hong Kong to Germany to Singapore, United Kingdom, USA. So I think the yellow lines are all the import products. And again, this is finished product, not raw materials and packaging. On the export side, the receiving markets are even more, nearly double the markets we're importing from. Okay, so we're so far reaching about 37 countries around the world. Now, in reality, a destination like West Africa, which we're actually serving now and isn't even on this slide, but in the past few months, we've got new business in West Africa. West Africa is a region serving 19 different countries. So whilst we service 37 markets, we're probably reaching 70 or 80 different countries with product produced by Nestle here in Vietnam for distribution around the world. Okay. The question then is, how do we make those decisions? What do we do? And we try and market what we're doing to our affiliate businesses, to the other Nestle companies around the world. We treat them as customers in the sense that, you know, we provide a high level of service. We try and optimize the convenience of what they receive for us, suited to their business. And we try and match that with a service logistically that gives them the best possible outcome. Spend a lot of time and effort communicating so they understand what we're doing, and so that we support them with the right marketing know-how and the likes. And obviously, they want the best cost solution they can get for whatever it is we're doing for them. So cost is always a factor. Beyond that, we have some internal decision making. This is a bit of a weird slide. I made it up to help explain some of the things we were doing about a year ago to a corporate VIP visitor, to explain why we were trying to do some things with coffee that he wasn't familiar with. So if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, first of all, we said, look, we're producing pure soluble coffee. We're producing decaffeinated coffee. Most of that is going into what we call IMS, intermarket supply, from a Nestle business in Vietnam to a Nestle business in the USA or a Nestle business in Europe. So this is the majority of what we're exporting. Mr. Vu's business is the third-party business up here, where he's doing finished product to customer distributors. Well, he can explain. Mr. Vu.
Hello. Yes, it works. So yeah, a little bit more about third-party exports. So from our decaf production line in Tri An, we have a byproduct called crude caffeine. So crude caffeine is useful for many industries. So for beverage, for pharmaceutical, nutrapharmaceutical, so they use it as an ingredient. So we are selling those to buyers in India, in Italy. We are developing into Germany too. And besides that, we are expanding our export of finished goods. So it is we export taste of Vietnam to the world. It goes to Asian market, to Vietnamese living in overseas, Asian people living in overseas. So we are quite successful in the 6 years on board. So we export our Maggi to Australia, to US, to Dubai. Yeah, and we are also working on that too for European countries. And for Cafe Vite, we export Cafe Vite to US, yeah, to Hong Kong, China, and then we keep expanding those to serve customers out there in the markets.
Context, when Mr. Vu joined the company, getting on for 6 years ago, the scale of the business he was looking after was about $2 million. Now it's close to $6 million. It's still a small part of our overall business, which is maybe $600 million. But nonetheless, it's something that we've grown as an opportunity from the core business of these intermarket supplies to our affiliate businesses around the world. We recently invested in Nestle Dolce Gusto, which is a capsule coffee, which you put into a machine and it makes your coffee from the capsule. And when our VIP visitor came, I said, look, we've got all these things that make us a good place for your investment in the future. So I was, if you like, selling the case for Nestle Vietnam as the place for investment in the future for more coffee business. We can hedge on the international exchanges. Our logistics has been optimized for both bulk and finished product packaging. We've done excellent jobs in getting costs down, in optimizing working capital. We've done a lot of work on the sustainability of our sourcing of coffee and responsibly sourced coffee, and I can talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go through the slides. Mr. Vu has talked about his sales of crude caffeine and our optimization of that area. And our location locks us into the ASEAN Free Trade Agreements, RCEP, EVFTA more recently. We can do things like duty drawback. We can import for re-export. We can bring in different origins of coffee to blend and make specialist coffees without it being a cost penalty to the end customer or consumer. So we have a lot of flexibility. So all these enablers make us one of the best locations to invest in further manufacturing capacity in the future because we've done all these things and optimized them. Okay? And that then in turn leads us back to increase the number of receiving markets and customers that we develop by doing all that work and enabling those opportunities. So I mentioned RCEP briefly. Daniel asked this specific question. To be honest, I don't see in Vietnam RECP having a significantly big impact. Maybe it will impact areas like certification of origin. So some of the documentary elements of international trade that you need to get right. RCEP has a platform that will hopefully improve aspects around certification of origin, which is one of those non-tariff barriers that can become complicated if they aren't aligned well. But in terms of the duty rates, most of the countries we're operating with and encapsulated under RCEP are already enjoying a free trade agreement with Vietnam, and we already have fairly optimal duty rates to many of those destinations. So RCEP has come after many free trade agreements that took cost out and made some steps towards efficiency. RCEP will hopefully add further efficiency to our international trade activity. For some of our other businesses around Asia, so China, Japan, Korea, RCEP actually has a more material impact because they see the benefit in duty rates that they can then use as they export to other parts of the RCEP region. Okay. I have to say I'm not a huge expert in this area. It's more of, I have an expert who knows the answer rather than me personally knowing the answer to these things. We have a team of about 80 people looking after the supply chain activity, including a small team of import-export experts. who are working very closely with customs and with our global experts to optimize all these things. Okay, I'll pause there for a second. Did that bring up any other questions that I didn't answer fully or that you wanted to get into a bit more detail on? Daniel?
Yeah, I have a question. If you go back to the slide where you import and export from the countries, yeah, yeah, that one. The value of basically imports and the value of exports that you move around in dollars. Do you have like a positive balance?
Yep.
Or?
I mean, we do increase the number of imports we're bringing in because we're always trying to build the business, grow the business. And the logic is always that once you reach a critical mass, then you can invest in local manufacturing. Back to the question about why we've invested in plant here in the first place. So we continue to do that and to find the opportunities to build the business. But today that import value is probably somewhere between $65 and $70 million. And the export side is 105 million and growing significantly faster. So we have a positive trade balance, if you can call it that. And that looks like the gap is going to increase as we go forwards, because at some point, some of that 70 million import, hopefully we can convert to local production here anyway. Okay. Yes.
Sorry that only teachers have questions. Okay. Well, I'm not sure whether my understanding is correct. Yeah, that the imports here is imports of the raw materials, right?
No,
the raw coffee.
This is the finished product. So in addition to that, we import raw materials, and in terms of the costs we spend on procurement, most of what we buy is locally produced. About 70% of our procurement spend is local, but 30% things like milk powders and things, cocoa, things that aren't grown successfully here or produced successfully here, that we will import from a raw material and packaging point of view. Packaging, most of it is converted here in Vietnam. Yes. So SIG, Tetra Pak, they have their own conversion facilities here. The cans, they're all canned here. Some of the raw materials for the packaging will be imported, but the process of producing the packaging is pretty much all here in Vietnam.
I see. Yeah, because I'm thinking whether you have the business model of concentration in producing the semi-finished product, like you said that here the factories in Vietnam producing finished products, and then you have different factories in different countries.
Yes.
For making finished products,
yeah.
right? So what is the rationale for concentration of production of semi-finished product in Vietnam?
Again, that comes back to the point we were discussing earlier about cost of logistics, optimizing the source of production, to some degree duty rates and things as well. Yes. So for something like coffee, it makes more sense for us to do that initial value-added processing here in Vietnam, but the final packaging, which often unitizes product, so you get a much smaller consumer-ready format at the end destination for distribution there. For us to do all that here, you'd end up transporting a lot of unnecessary materials around the world that might be suboptimal in terms of cost or duties or just in terms of the cost of logistics of moving them. So better that we do bulk coffee, which is a semi-finished product that then is packed at end destination. We have the critical scale economies here of producing and processing that coffee. They then get the benefit of the lowest cost net solution by doing the packing at their end destination.
Yes, yes. Well, I think this is interesting because it is related to one kind of theory in international trade, increasing return to scale. Yeah, maybe get that.
Certainly we benefit from that in our coffee business because the scale of our coffee processing is very significant, and the economies that brings are extremely good.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay. And it's not just the processing, it's also the upstream management of the origin and the source and everything that goes with that. And we can talk about that in just a second as we go through these slides. Let me get into this because it's going to link back to that question a little bit. So sustainability is one of the things we're really, really focused on. Our chief executive in the past 2 or 3 years has said, we cannot, in good conscience, continue to do what we do without understanding the impact downstream of the products that we're making and upstream in terms of carbon neutrality, in terms of plastic pollution, in terms of water extraction and things. So that's now being baked into each and everything that we do to ensure we're honoring commitments the business has now made on sustainability on an end-to-end basis. And this slide just sort of summarizes at a very high level what our ambitions are, both at an individual level, at a community level, and for the planet. The main focuses are, as I said, climate change, which would be carbon neutrality. Safeguarding the environment would include things like packaging waste and eliminating packaging pollution downstream. Caring for water, achieving neutral or even positive balances in our water extraction and management. And in the sort of areas like rural development and livelihoods, working with farmers and making sure what we're doing with them leads to regenerative agricultural practices. So this is a big part of what we try to do with our coffee supply chain, work with farmers to drive them towards regenerative agricultural practices. All of this is built on the foundation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I presume you've talked about them to some degree. And we build our commitments on that platform. Translating that into what are we doing with our ESG initiatives, our environmental, social, and governance-based initiatives here in Vietnam. We work with kids looking for micronutrient fortification, for example, in many of the products that we're making for healthier kids. This is related to working with empowering ladies to become sort of entrepreneurial. It's called Chi Nest. This is sports, bringing Milo boiler is already very, very low levels of coffee smell and taste. By the time it's been burnt through the boiler, there's nothing left at all in the ash. Yeah, it's just ash. We could probably sprinkle some coffee flavor on it just to spice it up a bit, but it would be added after the fact. Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for being here with us. I have a question about the Vietnamese market. Are there any products that are more popular in the Vietnamese market compared to like the global market that Nestle is serving? And are there any reason why?
Okay. I think our biggest success here has been Milo, the Milo RTD business. And if I compare that ready-to-drink Milo business here in Vietnam, we are the biggest Milo RTD business worldwide of Nestle. So Vietnamese consumers have voted with their pockets very much in favor of convenient source of Milo to drink. We're not as big as some of the other Milo businesses that have a longer established and more based on powdered-based Milo solutions. But in the RTD, we're by far and away the biggest. The coffee products, we have a number of Vietnamese and unique products, which you're welcome to taste after we finish the talk. Maggi is unique here in developing culinary sauces. So oyster sauce, I think we were the first Nestle business to develop oyster sauce. Soy sauce you'll all be familiar with. We've come in with a fish sauce. It's a really lovely product. Unfortunately, it's a very competitive marketplace here in Vietnam. But if you get the chance to try our Maggi fish sauce, it's delicious. Sorry, I'm not here to sell you Maggi fish sauce, but nonetheless, it's a really good product. And look, I think one of the things we really enjoy is taking that unique Vietnamese coffee taste to the rest of the world. So those of us working very much in exports, and exports is my personal responsibility, we spend a lot of time persuading people to taste Vietnamese coffee, to enjoy the experience of Vietnamese coffee, and that's a really strong part of what we love to do. That we are people who love coffee anyway, and we love to share that love with our customers and consumers downstream. So there are a lot of things I'm very proud of that we're doing here in Vietnam, and that we take to the rest of the world. As Vu said in his brief talk, we take the taste of Vietnam to the world with our exports activity. Any other questions? Okay, here we go. Yeah.
Hello. Okay, so first I want to thank you for coming to sharing with us. So I want to ask about Vietnam exporting coffee. So coffee is the #1 exporting product of Vietnam. So I want to ask that, is your company contribute significantly to that coffee export? And secondly, I keep hearing that Trung Nguyên is the #1 coffee export in Vietnam. So is it true?
Well, let me give you the numbers. You can judge for yourself. So our Nestle Vietnam business processes something in the order of 35,000 tons of Vietnamese coffee each year. But Nestle globally buys 10 times as much Vietnamese coffee for processing in other parts of the world. So we have about 21 coffee factories like the one we have in Tri An in Dong Nai province. We have 21 other such factories around the world, many of which use Vietnamese coffee beans. So in total, Nestle is by far and away the biggest consumer of Vietnamese coffee beans, consuming in some years as much as 380,000 tons of Vietnamese coffee. So over 20% of the crop was bought by Nestle. Now, Trung Nguyên, in some areas, very specific areas, are bigger than us locally. But when it comes to export, no, they're not as big as Nestle. Do they do the same work we do with farmers? No, definitively. Nobody does the same work that we do with farmers. We're reaching, as I mentioned, around 70 or 80,000 farmers, and we can be really, really proud in the 10 years, 11 years nearly, that scheme has been going, of the value add we've created for those farmers and for the improvement in their incomes and the regenerative activity that it's had in rejuvenating their coffee plantations. So I'm not here to diss Trung Nguyen in any way, but in real terms, Nestle is a much bigger coffee player globally than Trung Nguyen. In some sectors, they're bigger than us here in Vietnam. In other sectors, we're bigger. But I think we can say we contribute more to coffee in Vietnam, yes.
Thank you very much.
It's okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, yes. So as you mentioned before, so I see that the export volume is like higher than the value of the import. So how can you how can Nestle hedge the exchange rate risk in terms like the VND devalued against the USD due to that gap of trade? So how can you hedge the exchange rate risk?
Okay, good question. We have a treasury function, and it's actually a corporate function that services multiple geographies. And what they do is they look at the flow of fiat currency in and out of different countries, and they manage the risk associated with those trade flows, with the currency flow. Okay, exactly how they do it, I don't really know. What I can tell you is, we take a relatively low risk approach to currency hedging because we're not speculative as a business. We have a very high credit rating. We are, if not a triple plus, we're a double plus, which means we cannot maintain that credit rating and undertake speculative activity such as currency investments, should we say. Now, the positive consequences of our credit rating are we can borrow money incredibly cheap, often below LIBOR or prevailing interest rates. We can sometimes be paid to borrow money. I mean, it's ridiculous how cheap money can be when you have that level of credit rating. But in terms of the currency hedging activity, it's relatively low key, and it's based on the flow of currency rather than sort of individual gaps like the $70 to $105 million gap that we have. In practice, there are things I can do to help best manage our currency risk. So some of the activities we do from a procurement perspective, we take into account the forward buying and the currency risk that is associated with that. And at times we may choose to forward buy and bring the goods into Vietnam in order to lock in that currency and that pricing and effectively lock in that risk at a given point in time within a given financial year. We're not supposed to be managing currency by doing that. In reality, it does have an impact on your currency exposure. But I have to be honest and say that compared to other currencies I've dealt with in the past, the Vietnamese dong has been very stable. There's been, in the past 6 years, 2 or 3 years where you had this sort of gradual, slow erosion against the US dollar. But in the past 2 years, it's relatively flat in the longer term. So it's not something that's been a big risk and issue to us. Some of our other businesses around the world have dealt with huge currency fluctuations and in many cases devaluations. And it can be a big business issue to deal with. But we're in a very comfortable position with Vietnam, and I'm confident that that will continue for the foreseeable future with the way the authorities are running the economy here.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Okay. I think there's 10 minutes, so let me quickly go into the last point that Daniel asked me to cover, which is leading into careers, but we'll start with the labor circumstances. So Daniel asked me what the ratio of skilled versus unskilled labor is that Nestle hires here in Vietnam. Obviously, for the factories, many of the roles in the factories are relatively unskilled, but as time goes on, as automation increases, so those roles become more and more skilled. But relatively unskilled, then you probably have, of that 3,200 people working here, then probably 2,600 are in relatively unskilled roles in the factories, and the other 600 would be considered to be white collar or skilled workers in some form or another. Compared to most of the rest of the world, it's a very similar ratio, I would say. In terms of Switzerland, which is our corporate headquarters, there we have a disproportionate weighting into white collar workers because of the corporate activities that only happen in Switzerland. So we have a big research center that employs 2,000 people in Switzerland uniquely. And they're into sort of blue sky science research, into all kinds of funky areas of food and biotechnology and things. So Switzerland uniquely has a weighting that's out of kilter with the rest of the normal ratio between skilled and unskilled roles. But here in Vietnam, I'd say we're fairly normal. And here, even though labor costs are relatively low in the unskilled sector, by the time you get into more skilled sectors, there's not a huge difference across ASEAN in salaries at a skilled level. And actually, even here in Vietnam, we're looking at automation and automatic guided vehicles, robot type solutions, because COVID has shown us that you can have a major disruption because labor is unavailable. Now, that sounds really obvious with hindsight, but in practice, there weren't many circumstances where an entire factory's workforce could have to stop working for 2 or 3 weeks until COVID came along. So we are looking at things differently today as a consequence of the lessons learned through the COVID pandemic. And one of them is labor. And if there's any sort of payback on automation, then we will take that investment now. Okay. We have the luxury here in Vietnam of a continued growing business. So our labor can be redeployed. It's not about taking labor out, but it's about growing the level of automation we have across the business and redeploying labor. So provided they're happy to reskill, we can always keep people employed. Okay. All of us are having constantly to learn. It would be the truthful answer to that. We are introducing new technologies that I have to learn, that Mr. Vu has to learn. It's the white collar skills and the blue collar labor all are having to reskill constantly. People talk about learning economies and constant learning at work. My experience is that that is true, and it's never been more true in the past few years. The speed of new things we have to keep on learning is increasing, it's accelerating. So this morning, I was telling Daniel when we arrived, we're starting a kickoff session for a transformational project in our logistics area. New technologies, new processes, and different resourcing as an outcome, in order to be ready to start deploying some of the new technologies we need in transport, in planning, in routing, but ultimately, track and trace leading to better service, better utilization of the vehicles that we have, trying to drive environmental solutions and safe solutions so that the total package of what we're doing is improving in cost, in safety, in the reduced environmental impact, and ultimately towards carbon neutrality, etc. Okay. So what does a successful Nestle dream candidate look like? Many of you look like fantastic, successful dream candidates for Nestle, from what I can see. Obviously, capability, communication, attitude is super important. These are all things you would expect. I'm not going to, I'm not here as an HR representative, but these are all things that we want. I mean, honestly, potential is at the heart of this. You have to have the potential to thrive in our culture. And that's an important point I'll come to in the next slide or two. But you also have to have the potential to keep on learning. And back to the point I made on the previous slide, this need and ability to constantly learn and relearn new skills, new capabilities is super important. Don't come into a role, a career opportunity in Nestle and expect to bring the skills and capabilities you have and never need anything new. From day one, you will be learning new stuff. Okay. But we are a social organization. We're very networked, and leveraging networks becomes super important as part of the skills you bring. As you go, if you're aspiring to management and leadership positions, that's even more important. Knowing who to ask questions of, knowing who to go to get approvals or authorization, or simply to get ideas to build your business, to build your success. That's super important in a business like Nestle, which is socially cohesive, which is a networked organization. I don't mean that from a digital perspective, I mean that purely from a people perspective. Okay? It's facilitated digitally, but it's a people network. Here we are. So this is kind of our purpose statement. And again, I don't want to go into too much detail on it, but underpinning what we're doing, we're supposed to be ensuring and enhancing quality of life and contributing to a healthier future. That's the sort of mission and strat phrase for our purpose. Very much built on respect. I won't read out the slide to you. But this has to be built into what we're thinking, what we're doing, how we're doing things, how we're engaging with people, what our products are doing, how we're engaging with the communities in which we're working, our customers. This has to be baked into everything that we do. If it doesn't resonate with you, then Nestle is probably not the right company for you to be working with. Those values are truly part of what we are. And I think for most of us who work in Nestle, we're very proud that those values are baked into the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. I think personally, what we're doing with farmers and coffee respects those values in every sense and drives us towards our purpose. So, don't want to get too emotional about that, but there's our purpose and values. There's still a little bit of time for any final questions you might have. Otherwise, I will leave you with a hopefully now working QR code. But
I have one question. How important is it for Nestle to be able to teamwork? Like, do you have often projects 4 or 5 people in a group that need to work together?
Generally bigger than 4 or 5 people.
Right.
It's not. It would be luxurious to have a small team of 4 or 5 people. I mean, to give you an example, the thing we kicked off this morning, which is called transport hubs, the opening session had, I think, an attendance. To be honest, it's 2 businesses, but there were probably 25 to 30 people in the team from each business. Now, the teams are connecting. In this case, it was Vietnam and Thailand, but we're connecting with colleagues in the Philippines, in Sydney, in Australia, in Turkey, India, and I think Dubai, because those other geographies have people with expertise, either in the technology and the systems supporting it, or in the application of that technology and system to the solution that we're trying to drive. That would be quite standard for a teamwork and a project that we're embarking upon to drive a major transformational project across the business. And we're doing many of those things at any one point in time.
And for candidates for Nestle, being capable of team working is an important value that you have?
Yes, I mean, there are obviously a few roles that are less team focused, but once you get above a certain sort of managerial level, then you'll be constantly working in a team working environment in one form or another. And the further you go, the more that team working will become important.
All right, thank you.
That's the one. Yeah, down there.
Yes.
Daniel.
Bless you.
I just wanted to preface this question that I do not mean you any offend by this or your corporation in general. However, in your last slide, you did talk about how your values for your workers is to respect the workers, the farmers. However, just recently, there has been a lot of articles about cases of child labor that has been reported in West African countries, that Nestle, along with a lot of food beverage companies are, responsible and is considered to be, involved in that. So I'm not saying, again, I just want to make this really clear that I do not think you are a direct contributor to that. But what do you have to say about that? Don't you think that is a very significant breach in your code of conduct when it comes to how you wanted to protect your employee well-being and in general? Yeah. Thank you.
It's a good point. The answer to that, I don't have the answer to that. I really, truly wish I did. It's a problem endemic in those West African societies where children in very impoverished families can be passed on to families they think can do better for that child, but often it ends up in a more abusive relationship than was intended. This is a cultural practice that a business like Nestle is not able to stamp out. What we do try and do is invest in schools. We try and invest in educational solutions that allow children access to schools. And we try and work with those farmers to teach them that these practices are not appropriate and not something we can live with in the longer term. But the truth is that effort has been going on for many years and has not yet succeeded. Now, I went up to Sapa just about a month ago, and one of the minority, I think she was a black Manong lady, took us on a tour through her villages, and she explained to me that at the age of 13, she had been a kidnapped bride. Now, I honestly, I didn't know about that and had not been exposed to that. But here in Vietnam, there are instances that the rest of the world would find to be very shocking. Now, what do we do? Do we say, and this debate is a real debate, there are parts of northern Vietnam producing specific coffee qualities that would be very interesting to process and to market around the world and would probably be very value-added coffee, okay? If we start dealing with those communities where those practices of kidnapped bride and children not having access to education, etc., are still true today, are we then the cause of the problem? But we're trying, we'd have to go in and try and find solutions to those problems, to invest in education, to work with NGOs and the authorities concerned to try and improve the situation. But somebody could easily come along and say, you're encouraging the problem because you're buying coffee in that region and you're not solving the problem. So you see the problem, there's a chicken and egg argument there. Do you create the problem? If you aren't solving the problem, are you responsible for the problem? I don't have all the answers to that, but take that example of what could happen here in Vietnam if a business like Nestle or Trung Nguyen or any other coffee processing business goes to northern Vietnam, works in those communities. They can be accused of the same sort of abuses as we are being accused of in West Africa. So we need to understand the cultural realities, but ultimately we do need to find solutions. I fully agree. Thank you for a very challenging question.
Hello, thank you for coming here. I have one question. Is it always the case that the amount of labor is maintained when automation taking place?
It's not possible to always make that promise. We aspire to do so, and so far we've been successful here in Vietnam because our growth year on year is always creating new opportunities. Some people choose not to stay with us, irrespective of growth or of changes that might be going on. They might have other opportunities, they might have family reasons. There are many reasons people change job. But if I look at what we've done in the past 10 years here in Vietnam, the scale of the business 10 years ago was less than a third, maybe even about a quarter of what it is today. So in 10 years, we've grown 4 times, and the number of people employed by the business has certainly more than doubled, but it's not gone up 4 times. Okay.
Any more question?
Hi, thank you for coming. I want to ask about like with the recent like impact of the COVID pandemics, how is Nestle was hugely impacted by the pandemic, and how in like the trading activity and the supply chain entirely, and how the Nestle like combat with the pandemic.
Great question. Oddly enough, the impact was very different geography to geography. In many parts of the world, Nestle's product offering to customers and consumers are what you might call more provision-based. So noodles and other products that people want to have in their cupboards, especially when times are difficult. Here in Vietnam, our product profile is much more oriented towards convenience style goods. So our business was badly impacted by COVID, and in some sectors dropped up to 20%. In other parts of the world, the business grew. So our coffee exports grew at the same time as our convenience products dropped. So we had to kind of balance these differing impacts, and then the change in geographical impact for the origin of materials and packaging that were being sourced from overseas. We also had to then, more recently, manage the huge disruption to ocean freight and the lack of containers and increasing costs, and then subsequently the Suez Canal issue. All of these things have been going on whilst COVID has been happening. Some of them directly as a consequence, the Suez Canal not, but everything else was. And what we had to do was look at how to manage that on a day-to-day basis. We increased the stock that we held here in Vietnam to buffer against disruptions in the upstream supply chain. We worked with the authorities to increase the use of electronic tools to speed up customs clearance and importation clearance procedures. One of the problems we had for a long time was that several countries, you could get the finished good, you can get the material shipped, but the documents couldn't come with it because there were no airplanes flying. All the airlines had shut down, so your goods would arrive, but no documentation. So we had to find ways to scan and electronically use documentation for customs clearance. They still insist on the original documentation eventually arriving, but we managed to get the authorities to accept a scanned copy for release and use, and then subsequent follow-up with the original documentation when and as those documents arrive. So lots and lots of things like that going on. Primary focus was on the safety of our people and the safety of the people we're working with. Our secondary purpose was business continuity. In some areas like infant formula, there's a humanitarian dimension to what we're doing. If a child, if his mother is not able to breastfeed and is reliant on infant formula, that's its sustenance. So we had to make sure businesses like that would continue. La vie are obviously also very important. Okay. So many different aspects and a really challenging time, but fascinating to look back on the impact and the change that it will bring as we go forwards.
Right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more, but I think it has been really great to have you here. Thank you so much for this time. I think we can really give a round of applause. So then when you leave, you can take here one of the gifts, but please, I would ask you, each student take one food item and one drink item so that there's enough for everybody, all right? Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you also for joining. We have a short break, my class, we have a short break and then we continue here, right?
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you very much.